If you are a supposed conservative now saying that we should embrace legalized abortion in any form, then you are, make no mistake, advocating for a full-scale surrender. You're free to take that position if you want, but please, for the love of God, don't pretend that you're a fighter. You're waving the white flag. I will never accept abortion. I will never compromise on it. I will never give up any ground. I will not give an inch, not an inch. All abortion is wrong, always. It is never okay to kill an innocent and defenseless human being. There are no exceptions to this. None, period. I would rather die than compromise on this issue.
Matt Walsh gives one of the greatest pro-life addresses I've ever heard, and I share today why Christians and conservatives everywhere need to pick up the arguments in his address and spread them as far and wide as we possibly can. Today on Indie Thinker. Welcome to the show. My name is Reed Huberman. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Today's show is sponsored by our friends over at CMG Home Loans. Rates are dropping, so it's a great time to refinance or to purchase a new home. If you're going to do that, you need to check out our friends over at CMG Home Loans. And when you do so, let them know that Indie Thinker sent you. Now, perhaps one of the most infamous historical figures of all time is Neville Chamberlain, not because of what he did, but because of what he didn't do. It's reported that he shook Hitler's hand, and then as a result of that, he knew that Hitler was a man of his word. He's famous for waving around the Munich Agreement and then later declaring that there would be peace in our time. Of course, that all came crumbling down in 1940 when Chamberlain was removed as the Prime Minister of England because Hitler began to invade. Now, the reason this is important is because the policy of appeasement is encapsulated in Neville Chamberlain's story. There are people who would disagree with this and say that Neville Chamberlain actually did lots of really good things and perhaps he forestalled a greater war or something like that. There's all sorts of arguments as to why Neville Chamberlain is not the kind of coward that history has written him off as. But perhaps one thing is all we need to know about him more so than anything else is that you can never make peace with evil. Now, if you believe that, then you must believe that there is such a thing as just war, and I think World War II is perhaps the greatest illustration of the fact that it is an unfortunate reality that in the face of evil, only war, only bloodshed can stop further bloodshed. Now, for those who are a little bit puritanical and maybe pacifist, you might disagree with that, but I think the vast majority of us will realize World War II needed to be fought, Hitler needed to be stopped, and our world is a better place because he was. All that to say that appeasement is not a policy that actually works in foreign policy, especially when you are staring evil in the face. You must deal with it, and it must be stopped in its tracks before it can move any further. In other words, you cannot reason with evil. So, enter now into one of the biggest wars of our time. The annihilation of innocent children in the womb is an evil, unspeakable act that must be defeated in our time. And toward that end, I share with you a stirring address that Matt Walsh gave on the issue, and it needs to become the rallying cry for every Christian in America. Check it out.
There's no way to get around the fundamental fact that the pro-abortion movement wishes to deny that the humanity of the unborn, the personhood of the unborn, is just a fact. The pro-abortion advocate will try to say that the child's not a person because he's still developing, because he's dependent on his mother for survival. This, he will say, means that the baby lacks moral standing. But this view that personhood is acquired by degree and that it is forfeit if you are entirely dependent on someone else for survival clearly implicates more than just the unborn. It seems that the sick, the infirm, the disabled, the elderly all get caught up in this net. By this line of reasoning, all of these people have, at a minimum, less claim to personhood than I do. If personhood is on a spectrum, if it is contingent, then by this logic we have depersoned many categories of people, which is a feature, not a bug, of the pro-abortion movement. They intend to whittle away at both ends of life, the young and the old, unpersoning one subset after another, until the right to life has been extinguished for all but the privileged few. The only other option, aside from personhood being attained by degree, is that personhood and its attending moral rights and dignities is inherent to all living human beings. If something is inherent, that means that it belongs to the essential nature of that thing. The idea that our human dignity, our personhood, is inherent, that it belongs to our essential nature, cannot be lost or diminished under any circumstances. That's an idea that lies at the foundation of our country, at the foundation of any notion of human rights. It's an idea that everyone in this country pretends to believe under most circumstances. If an unborn baby does not have inherent value, then human value itself is not permanent or essential, and thus, if it does not have inherent value, then neither do you. You cannot gain inherent value. You either have it from the first moment of your existence, or you do not have it at all. Which is why sometimes I think that we get lost in the weeds with this argument about, well, does life begin at conception? The answer is yes, it does. But also, existence begins at conception. There's no question about that, is there? Whatever you want to call the child at the moment of conception, it at least exists, doesn't it? And if you say that life does not begin at conception, then what you are saying is that there was a moment of your own existence when you were not a person, and that doesn't make any sense. How could there be a moment of your own existence when you were not you? And the personhood argument for abortion is actually even worse than it sounds at first. It's so bad that even if it were true, it would do almost nothing to prove the pro-abortion case. This is how wrong these people are, that even if they were right, they would still be wrong.
Introducing the ultimate AI voiceover. Yep, like me. Go to artlist.io and get a...
Because the personhood argument for abortion is a syllogism with a missing premise. It seems to go like this. Premise one, an unborn baby is not a person. He is merely a potential person. Conclusion, therefore we can kill him. Now wait a second. Two does not flow logically from one. You're missing something here. You skipped over a step. Just because someone isn't a person doesn't necessarily mean that you can kill them. That's a whole separate case you need to make that you haven't made. There's a whole other premise you have to establish. You haven't even tried to do it. So even if I conceded this point, even if I let you make the first massive logical leap and I said, okay, it's not a person, it's a potential person, you still have another even bigger leap to make. Because now you need to prove that it is okay to destroy this potential person. I don't see how you make that case, because if I agree it's a potential person, for the sake of argument, it would seem to me that this potential human ought to be treated like the most valuable non-person thing on the planet. It would seem to be the second best thing next to being a person. And I don't think it is necessarily okay to kill the second best thing. I mean, wouldn't the potential person still be more valuable than, say, a sea turtle egg? Sea turtle eggs are protected by the federal law. There's no question that sea turtles aren't people. Now, to be clear again, I don't even for a moment buy the idea that an unborn person is just a potential person. I reject it outright on scientific, logical, and moral grounds. I'm just trying to establish that the argument doesn't work even on its own premise.
If there is a sense of optimism in anything that Matt just shared, I think it's this. And it's that we're watching abortion advocates in real time have to argue the most ridiculous things on the planet. No longer do abortion advocates argue that life doesn't begin at conception, that life begins some magic number of weeks, down the line. Almost everyone now will say, sure, life begins at conception. But the ridiculous argument that we're hearing now from abortion advocates is that, yes, it's a human being, it has personhood, but personhood comes in degrees. Personhood is obviously on a spectrum. Now, popular skeptic Alex O'Connor just recently argued this a couple years back with Trent Horn, the Catholic apologist, where he tells us that basically a brand new fertilized egg has the same moral value as a clam.
And so in the situation, in the case of animals, I think there are a lot of animals that have this sentience or personhood, if we could use it so broadly, but there are some animals that don't. Like, I'd be fine with doing basically whatever you like to oysters, for example, because they just don't feel. And I think that an oyster is significantly more developed and probably worth more morally than a zygote a day after it's been conceived.
What you just heard from Alex there is kind of disturbing. One of the reasons is because he just flatly states something that is perfectly unscientific, and then we're supposed to accept it as something that's morally good and intellectually honest, but of course it isn't, because he's using false equivalency here. Even if I were to give into the idea that there are degrees of personhood, that a human zygote, a fertilized egg, is a person, but it's just kind of like a quasi-person, whatever that even looks like, until it kind of progresses down the trimesters. Even if I were to consent to that, there's a false equivalency here. This stage of development in human life is in no way likened unto a clam or an oyster or any other mollusk, because one of these things will continue to grow, will continue to develop and evolve. One of these things will not. So even if I gave you the kind of potential argument, it still doesn't make any sense, because the potential of a zygote far outweighs any other potential of anything that you could possibly think of on the planet. But this is the idiocy of the personhood spectrum in the first place. Personhood isn't on a spectrum. And believing that kind of puts you in the camp of moral monsters. So moral monsters like the person who said this: eugenics is the most adequate and thorough avenue to the solution of racial, political, and social problems. So in other words, we have some racial problems in America, and by the way, under your breath, the person who said this, talking about black people. And we've got some political issues. We can get rid of our political enemies and social problems. Hey, you just don't have enough money? Eugenics is your answer. If you guessed that the person who said that is the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, you would be correct. Now, even worse, how about this saying? Leben unwertes Leben. Now, that was a famous saying, life unworthy of life. Well, if you guessed that that very German-sounding phrase comes from the Nazis, you would be correct. It is a phrase that they used for the disabled and for the Jews and for anybody, frankly, that they didn't like or that they didn't think fit within the Aryan race. So a life that was unworthy of life was just anybody that they deemed unworthy of life. Kind of like a person who would arbitrarily say that personhood is on a spectrum. So maybe if you don't want to sound like a Nazi, it's time that we stopped trying to evaluate human life and whether or not it is worthy of being protected. If human beings do not have inherent value from conception, then no one does, because it is existence and the individual's existence that gives them inherent value, not their stage of development. Obviously, this opens the door wide for getting rid of handicapped people, to the disabled, and to the elderly. If we think that we have the ability to designate the moral and the potential value of human beings, then what will stop any of that slippery slope from sliding in to the kind of inhumanity that we've seen in the past? It's time for us to realize that there's another name for a spectrum of personhood justifying snuffing out the existence of these people. There's a word for that. It starts with M and it ends with erder. Matt continues, and he really starts to focus like a laser on the people who are potentially most responsible for the proliferation of abortion. And no, it isn't liberals, and no, it isn't progressives. It's actually Christians and conservatives. Check it out.
That's why it's such a tragedy that in recent months, a large contingent of people who are supposed to be on our side have abandoned this simple truth. Indeed, it's one of the most shameful and twisted ironies that I've ever seen that pro-lifers won the greatest human rights victory of all time with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. But rather than our side being emboldened by our historic achievement, rather than celebrating, rather than acting confident and triumphant, rather than throwing parades to celebrate this amazing thing that has happened, instead, many conservatives, quote unquote, have over the past many months and last couple of years become very shy about this issue. They've even blamed us, pro-lifers, for some of the electoral defeats in recent elections. They claim there will be more defeats in the future, and when they happen, it'll be our fault. Now, the first question I have for any conservative who claims that we can only win by being moderate on abortion The first question I have is this: what the hell do you know about winning? What wins do you have under your belt? What battles have you fought and won? What battles have you fought at all? Because as long as I've been alive and involved in any of these issues, there's always been that voice, that very loud voice among people that pretend to be allies of ours. And all they ever do is say, well, that's a little too far. Don't say that. No, let's not fight over, let's not die on this hill. They never find a hill worth dying on. And one day you look around and you look, well, there's no hills left.
6 years ago, I had it all. 2 years later, I lost everything.
So I go back to this question: why the hell would anyone come to you for insight on this issue or any other if you're in this camp? You want to talk to me about winning? Then show me your wins, or shut up. Now, I can show you our wins. We have them as pro-lifers. What about you? And these are all very good questions, but we never get an answer. Instead, we're assured that conservatives are losing because of the abortion issue. The issue is unwinnable. Pro-lifers will screw everything up. We have to come out and endorse legalized abortion in order to win. I've even heard, as I think many people in this room have, alleged conservatives recently declare that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. I've heard this from conservatives. Literally repeating pro-abortion talking points from the 1990s. Now, just to be clear, if you are a supposed conservative now saying that we should embrace legalized abortion in any form, then you are, make no mistake, advocating for a full-scale surrender. You're free to take that position if you want, but please, for the love of God, don't pretend that you're a fighter if you do. You're waving the white flag. You're doing the thing that the other side never does, and ours too often does. You are snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. You are apologizing for winning. But before you hoist that flag, let me offer a few thoughts. First of all, you can blame pro-lifers for the recent string of electoral defeats, or, especially given that this string began before Dobbs, you could consider the possibility that the right, by and large, has been running bad candidates and bad campaigns. It's amazing when I see this clown car parade that they trot out around election time, and these clowns lose, and then they turn to us and say, why'd you do that to us? This is especially worth considering given that many of the losers over the past few years have not even been pro-life hardliners or pro-life at all. Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, for one example. Liberal on the issue. Second, the claim that conservatives should moderate on abortion is not some brilliant new insight, okay? It's not any kind of bold political innovation. All these people that say this now, acting like, you know what, I just thought of something. I think we should be more moderate. Oh, wow. How did you come out? That was a real light bulb moment. This is what the establishment has been saying for my entire life. Since I was born and before, the establishment has insisted that the only way to win is to go soft on abortion, compromise, hide from the issue, undersell it. This has been conventional milquetoast Republican thinking forever. Does it appear to have been effective? Does it have a track record of success? Ask yourself that. These people have been losing and scapegoating social conservatives forever. They've been blaming us for their failures since always. This is nothing new. Why would we buy into it now? The truth is that so-called social conservatives are the only ones on the right side of the political spectrum who've been doing any winning of any kind. Not only are we not to blame for Republican losses, but we are the only ones who can claim any wins at all.
So essentially what you just heard there from Matt is something that I hear all the time, not only from conservatives, but also from Christians and pro-life Christians at that somehow we are supposed to moderate on certain issues because we need to look at the aggregate. We need to look at the long-term wins. So let's moderate on murder. And I say that facetiously because when you actually understand that abortion is murder, if you actually agree with that, in what other world are we moderating on issues as severe? I mean, we don't go around moderating on the issue of stealing people's cars, and that's obviously way less severe than ending someone's life. But we don't say, well, let's slow it up a little bit. We don't really want to make stealing people's cars illegal. Now understand, that takes for granted the fact that we've progressed because of idiotic arguments from pro-lifers and Christian conservatives. We've progressed to the point where people don't really equate often abortion as murder like they should. But for those of us that know better, it is. And it is unconscionable to actually argue that we moderate on this thing. Remember what your mom told you about Band-Aids, that it's better just to rip the thing off than it is to actually slowly but surely pull it? This would be one of those issues. We don't moderate on murder. Moreover, this is the thing that drives me nuts about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is supposed to be this guy that doesn't care about what the media thinks about him and doesn't care about what liberals, he speaks his mind. And this is why right-wing, working-class conservatives really love Donald Trump. But Donald Trump moderating on this issue isn't leadership. Him caring about these people that supposedly are going to vote for him if he just doesn't take a hard stance on abortion is basically akin to the existence of unicorns and leprechauns. And most importantly, it's not leadership. If you're going to be a true leader of the free world, you lead on these issues, not simply adjust to consensus. This isn't an issue of political strategy, in other words. And really, I said most importantly, but this is the most important part. Moderating on this issue cannot be suggested until we have fought and lost. If we have tried to truly fight on this issue and stand for this issue like we should, and we've just been obliterated, then for crying out loud, okay, maybe I'll accept the argument that there's a more strategic way to save more lives of babies. But here's the problem with that. As many people as you'll hear tell you, well, what about the red wave that was going to come in 2022? And the post-Roe world is responsible for creating this loss. Well, it has nothing to do with the fact that Donald Trump wants to continually talk about election fraud rather than actually talking about what it means to fight in a world where we desperately need Republicans to win. It's all because of Roe. That's the only reason we lost. It has nothing to do with the fact that Trump basically told people in Georgia not to go and vote because of election fraud, like that was going to win any big points for us. I can succinctly give this argument to you. Name one conservative politician that has effectively argued against abortion. I won't hold my breath waiting for you to do that because the truth is there isn't one. So how in the world can we say that we need to moderate on abortion when there isn't a single conservative Republican on the planet who has actually effectively tried to argue for it? Now, I think it would take a miracle, but I would honestly love to see it. If Donald Trump held Democrats, and specifically Kamala Harris's feet to the fire on this issue. They want to pull on people's heartstring and use rare exceptions that make up about 2% of abortions, talking about life of the mother, rape, and incest. I would love it for Donald Trump to turn to them and say, all right now I want you to stand by a policy that protects abortion in the case of rape, incest, and life of the mother, and distance yourself from all other abortions. And then when she doesn't do it, you have the great opportunity to say, you're just a liar, Kamala. You don't care about life of the mother, rape, and incest. You just want unmitigated, balls to the wall abortion in any case. Because we all know that's exactly what the policies that they're advocating for. They're not moderating. They're not caring about the life of the mother. They're using that to pull on people's heartstrings. But just one politician is all I'm asking for, and we have none. So how can we dare talk about moderating when we haven't even actually gone as extreme as we need to? So, and Matt Walsh is correct about this. Don't pretend you're a fighter. And let's just step back. You're not even thinking clearly on this issue. No one is sitting back and thinking to themselves, I just love Donald Trump. He's amazing in almost every single way, except that abortion thing. If he would just moderate on abortion, these suburban liberal women, they would vote for Donald Trump any day of the week, and they would leave the femme fatale, Kamala Harris, in the dust. This is not a world we live in. What are you talking about? So let's get real and let's argue effectively and thoughtfully on this issue. And finally, Walsh will give us a final closing remark that I think needs to echo in the soul of each and every person that hears it. So check it out.
Few Republicans have had the guts or wherewithal to respond that way, and so they lose. Here's where I stand, and I believe that everybody in this room stands with me on this. I would not compromise on abortion, even if it really did mean losing every election from now until kingdom come. And that's because to accept child murder is to forfeit your soul. And if we are really a country where child murder is so popular, where acceptance of child murder is so fundamental to our way of life, that it's impossible to win if you oppose it, then we are not a country worth saving. If that were the case, then we deserve whatever destruction is coming our way. God will strike us down for our sins. And I couldn't stand in the way of that if I wanted to, and I don't want to. I will never accept abortion. I will never compromise on it. I will never give up any ground. I will not give an inch, not an inch. All abortion is wrong, always. It is never okay to kill an innocent and defenseless human being. It is always our obligation as human beings, as parents, as Americans, to protect the innocent, especially our children. And if we cannot do that, if we won't do that, then we are worthless. There are no exceptions to this. None, period. I would rather die than compromise on this issue. But the good news is that the whole premise is flawed. The pro-life message can win in this country, but only if we have the courage to fight for it and the intelligence to fight well. The pro-life message has already won in so many ways on so many battlefields. Everybody in this room can attest to that. Winning is our destiny because truth always prevails in the end. You just have to stand there with it and not leave. We stand in the truth when no one else will. We speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. We say what must be said and we do what must be done. And if we continue to do that without fear or compromise, eventually the day will come when every child is free to be born and to live. I see that day in the future, but we're not there yet. And so for now, we fight.
Yes and amen. And I want to end with a historical argument here of sorts, because I think most Christians can agree with this, but even if you're not, maybe you can start to grapple with the gravity of abortion in America. There's an archaeological site called Tophet, and it was a place where 20,000 urns were found with the remains of children. Now, the word Tophet is also another name for the Valley of Hinnom or Gehenna. Any Bible studiers will know that Jesus references Gehenna or the Valley of Hinnom multiple different times in the Gospels. It's used as an allegory for judgment and an illustration of HE double hockey sticks, let's say. But the reason that Jesus uses that place as a kind of an allegory for judgment and an allegory for God's wrath is because there babies were killed. Now, we don't really know how many were killed, but let's just say that place has been dug through pretty well, and there were 20,000 urns found there from the time of the Carthaginians. Now, that's not to suggest that there weren't more, but let's just say a conservative estimate would be far below how many babies we have killed in America since Roe was instituted. Roe was instituted in 1973, and until the present, there have been over 60 million babies that have been aborted since Roe was instituted. So here's the point. If God's wrath would turn against a society for a fraction of those children losing their lives, then what would keep him from focusing his wrath on America for one of the gravest evils of our time? If nothing else, have the humility to learn from our forebears. The abolition of slavery was made possible because of Christians with a backbone, Christians who refused to moderate on the issue of slavery because it was such a moral injustice. How much more now, the thing that guarantees the death of people? Slavery very often ended in death, and it certainly ended in punishment, and it ended in a servitude that was egregious and morally reprehensible. How much more abortion, which always ends the life of an innocent human baby? We need a group of pro-lifers who will, as abolitionists of the past, stand up and say, we will risk everything to fight for this issue, and we will breathe our last dying breath to make sure that we live in an America where the culture of death is no longer celebrated, where we no longer create these morally benighted arguments about fetuses and spectrum of personhood. Slavery is only a thing of the past because Christians had enough backbone to stand up against an injustice that they saw in their age. By God's grace, I pray that we can come up with at least a modicum of their fortitude on the issue of abortion. All right, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and go with God.